All right, guys. So it looks like it just hit 8 o'clock, so we'll get started. Welcome back. This is the second session for Introduction to Beekeeping in New England, and we'll just hop right into it here. So today we're gonna talk about the types of bees that are found in the hive and their roles and what to expect. So there's three types of bees you're going to find. You're going to find a queen, workers, and drone. The queen is the one that everybody is most concerned with how she's doing, because she's the primary person or primary provider of the hive. She's the one that lays the eggs, helps with the hive population. She does a lot of the work. The next one is going to be the workers, which is going to be the majority of the bees you're going to find in the hive, and then the drones, which are the male bees. The workers are going to be the females, and the drones are going to be the males. So we'll start with the drones. So the drones are the male honeybees. The drone comb, if you look over at the picture here, the drones are a little bit bigger than the worker bees, so the cells that they're in within the hive bump out a little bit. So you can tell when you're looking at a frame whether it's going to have, if it has drones or worker bees, which when we talk about when you're doing a hive inspection, I think it's the session 4, we'll understand why it's important to know how many of each you have within each hive. So they're pretty easy to identify. The drones, they're going to be bigger ones. When you're just starting out, you might see a drone and think it's your queen. So it's easy to get them confused, but hopefully we'll be able to help identify them a little bit easier for you. The drones, they make up about 4% of the hive, so a small percentage. But they don't do any work in the hive. They don't go out and forage. They don't help do any cleaning of the hive. Their only purpose is to go out and promote the genetics of that hive and mate with queens. The queen, when she lays the drones, she lays an unfertilized egg. So the queen can decide what kind of egg she wants to lay, whether it's a fertilized or unfertilized. The unfertilized egg, she lays it in a cell, it becomes a drone. The fertilized egg becomes a female worker bee. The drones develop in 24 days, so they take a little bit longer than the workers. We'll go through each one of them, but they take the longest time to develop. Lifespan's approximately 8 weeks. The drones don't have stingers, you can practice picking them up out of a hive if you want to, deal with queens more often. As you go down the path of beekeeping, you may want to pick up your queen now and then. It's good to practice with drones because they're not going to sting you. If you squish one, it's not the end of the world. And every fall, because they don't contribute to the hive, the workers kick them out to preserve their own, to preserve all the honey that they've saved up over the course of the summer and fall. And so the drones get kicked out every fall so that they have enough food to last for themselves. The worker bees, they're always female. They make up 96% of the hive. So your typical hive is probably going to be close to 50,000 bees to 75,000 bees, and 96% of them are going to be the females, formed by fertilized eggs. So when the queen lays the fertilized eggs, they're going to become worker bees. They're not mated, so they don't have any sperm, so they can't be queens. The difference between a worker and a queen is whether they've fully developed the workers are sexually undeveloped. So having a sexually developed bee will become a queen. Their lifespan's approximately 6 weeks. During the winter, they kind of slow down and they'll make it through the winter, usually closer to 4 or 5 months. The queen, so usually there's only one per hive. On some rare occasions, you might find two. And sometimes that's if there's a supersedure taking place where one queen isn't performing, they'll replace her, and then the old queen will either be killed or she'll fly away. The queen bee is the fastest to develop. She develops in 16 days. The queen cells are easy to spot. So if you look at a frame, it kind of looks like a peanut. So there's a picture of a queen cell on the right for you there. So if you see one of those, you know the hive is creating a new queen. They took one of the eggs that is laid by the queen, a fertilized egg, and they're taking that and creating a queen out of it. The workers care for the queen constantly. They feed her, they clean her, they do all the grooming. Her only responsibility is to lay eggs, and she can lay 2,000 eggs per day, in the right circumstances. She chooses to lay fertilized or unfertilized. Like we mentioned, the unfertilized will be the drone, the fertilized will be the worker. And other than mating, and if the hive swarms, she never leaves the hive. So once she's mated in the hive, she stays there the rest of her life. She's the largest bee, and in most cases, she's too big to be able to fly after she's mated. So she stays in the hive the entire time. So don't be fooled by queen cups. So usually when you see a queen cell, you know something is not quite right in your hive. And we'll talk more about that in doing hive inspections in another, I think it's session 4. But the bees will practice making queen cells. And as long as there isn't an egg or a larva in one of those peanut-looking cells, everything is fine. No need to do anything. Sometimes they just practice making the cells, and then they tear them down, a day or two later. So when you're normally doing a hive inspection, if you see a queen cell and it has an egg or larva, then you know you need to take some sort of action. As long as there's no egg or larva in there, you're fine. So bee development. So the timeline, they start off as eggs, and the eggs are really, really small, literally like a grain of rice. There's a close-up on the right here for you with a black foundation. Makes it a little bit easier to see. Normally, if you're just using a wax foundation, it'll look a lot like the picture on the left, and they're very difficult to see. You kind of have to hold them up to the light just right. But if you see eggs, you know your hive is doing well. The queen is laying eggs, and things are looking good. So you don't always, when you're doing a hive inspection, have to find the queen. If you see eggs, then you know things are going well, and you know that you have a laying queen. So they start off as eggs. Then after 3 days, the eggs hatch and become larvae. You can see kind of really, really young larvae in the, let me see if I can do something here. All right, so I think you can see this. So there's a very small larva right over here, and then a larger larva in the other cells, and then a couple cells even have tiny little eggs. So after the 3rd day, the egg hatches, and then from days 3 to about day 8, the larva grows, and the bees feed the larva and help them continue to grow. So after the larvae have grown, the bees put a wax coating over the top, and then they become pupa and continue to develop underneath the wax cappings until they're ready to hatch. And they're usually under the wax cappings for 7 to 10 days. And then they emerge, they chew their way out of the cells, and they crawl out, and they just start their work. Usually the first job is they're cleaning cells. So they're cleaning cells, getting ready for queen to lay fresh eggs in those cells. So the timeline, this is kind of a breakdown for each of the 3 types of bees. So they all start as eggs for the first 3 days. Then the larva, days 4 to 8 for the queen and worker, the drone a little bit longer. Then the cells are capped. And then the emergence, queens emerge on the 16th day, workers 21st, and drones on the 24th. Now, why it's important to know these emergence dates, if you're only looking in your hives every, say, 3 weeks, you could have a queen develop and grow and hatch, and you could have a swarm all in between hive inspections. You can also know that if you can't find the queen for whatever reason, but you see eggs, you know that at least in the last 1 to 3 days, you had a queen in the hive. And if all you see is capped cells of brood, then but no eggs or no larva, then you know probably in the last 1 to 7 days something happened to your queen. So when you're doing the inspections, it's good to have these numbers kind of in the back of your head, knowing it helps you just determine how the hive is doing. So how the hive makes a queen. So the queen that's in there will lay a fertilized egg in one of the cells. Then for whatever reason, the hive decides they want to create a new queen. As soon as that egg hatches into larva, which will be around day 4, the workers feed the larva an excessive amount of royal jelly, which is a food that they feed the larva. And all larvae get some amount of royal jelly, but they'll pick one and feed it quite a bit. And it helps the bee develop quicker and helps it develop its ovaries. Then on the 16th day, the new virgin queen will emerge from her cell. For the next few days, she'll walk around the hive, get familiar with it. She'll go on mating flights, and she'll mate with a couple dozen drones. There's actually drone congregation areas, so she'll fly to that area, and then she'll do her mating with drones from a variety of hives in the area. And then after her mating flights, she returns to the hive, and about a week after she's hatched, she'll start laying eggs. So if you have a situation where you have a queen that was replaced and they created another queen, it's good to know that, if you see her but she isn't laying eggs yet, maybe she just came back from mating flights. So there's several reasons that a hive will make a new queen. One would be if the hive is too crowded. So if it seems like there's a lot of bees in a small space and the queen doesn't have room to lay, or there's just not enough ventilation in there, it triggers a swarm impulse. And so the queen will, the hive will create several new queens usually, and the first one to hatch will go around and kill all the other queen cells to kind of establish that it's the primary queen. Usually the day before that, the current queen will leave the hive with about 60% of the bees that are in the hive and find a new place to live. That's usually the kind of the swarm that you'll see, hanging off of a tree branch or on a tree fence, or I think I saw one even on an umbrella in Times Square. But that's the hive leaving, splitting, and that's how that's how the hives reproduce themselves. They'll swarm and create 2 separate hives. So that's the swarm impulse. Another reason would be a defective queen. So if the queen not laying well, so if she's laying, a very spotty pattern, so if there's not a lot of cells being filled with eggs, they might try to replace her. She could also run out of sperm, which tends to happen after 2 or 3 years, and or sooner if she's not well mated, and then all she'll lay is drones. And the hive will know that something's not right with the queen and supersede her. They'll create a new queen and either kill her or kick her out of the hive. Another reason would be if the current queen died for whatever reason, whether it be the beekeeper accidentally pulled the frame out and dropped her and stepped on her, or could be any number of reasons. But if the current queen died, as long as there's eggs or very young larvae, the hive has the opportunity to create a new queen. There's also a perceived defect. So the hive can be honey bound, which means the queen doesn't have any place left to lay eggs in the hive. So the foragers, if there's a really strong pollen and nectar flow, the bees are coming back and filling all the cells with honey or nectar. The queen doesn't have any place to lay. The bees within the hive will think, hey, she's not laying any eggs, something must be wrong with her, and they'll create swarm cells that way, create queen cells that way, rather. So when you get a queen, you can either get her marked or unmarked. The marked queens for a beginner, usually the best way to go. It's usually only an extra maybe $3 or $4 to have a queen marked, and they just put a little dot of paint on her back to make her easier to find when you're looking through a hive. The color of the marking tells you the age of the queen, so different years have different colors. So, for example, last year was red because it was 2018. So the queens that were hatched and mated last year had a red dot. This year they'll have a green dot. 2017 was a horrible year because it was a yellow dot, which was very similar to the color of pollen. So it didn't really help you identify the queen at all. But you'll know how old your queen is if you have a queen that's marked. So the worker bee's job. So the first couple of days after they chew their way out of their cell, they're cleaning cells. They're getting in there, cleaning out any debris, any extra royal jelly that might be in the cell. So the queen has a nice clean cell that she can lay her eggs in. After that, for the first few days, she becomes a nurse bee, where she's either feeding larvae, caring for the queen, or building more comb so that the hive has more space to either store nectar, to store pollen, or to lay eggs. After that, days 10 to 20, she'll be making her way towards the front of the hive, so she'll be fanning. So basically what that is standing in front of the hive and flapping her wings to either provide ventilation in the hive to get a breeze going through there, or to alert the other bees of the scent of the queen so they know which hive is theirs. They'll also do nectar transfer, so the forager bees that are coming back with pollen or nectar will land, and they'll basically transfer the nectar to the bees that are on the landing board, and then they'll bring it into the hive and store it. And then after that, days 20 to 40, they're either the guard bees, so they're the ones that are hanging by the entrances, ready to go out and sting any perceived threat, or they're going to go out and be foragers. So the older they get, the more dangerous their job gets, because the likelihood of coming back is lower when you're a guard or a forager, whether it be birds or bad weather. All right, so how do we go about getting bees? Generally, you'll buy a 3-pound package of bees. It's a package of bees that will have a screen side for ventilation. It has a can in the middle which has syrup in it, and approximately 3 pounds of bees, as well as and one queen. And the queen is going to be in a cage. The queen is not necessarily the bees that are in the boxes original queen, so they need a little bit of time to get used to her. So So she's in a separate cage, so they can't attack her if she's not an intruder. But they can get familiar with her pheromone and accept her as their queen. So the pros, you can get the packages of bees pretty early in the season. April and May, you can start getting packages of bees. They cost less than a nucleus hive, which we'll talk about next. They're usually right around $125 for the 3-pound package. And the supply of packages that's available is significantly higher than with the nucleus colonies. The downsides is that the hive might not accept the queen that they have been provided. Small chance for that happening, but that happened to me my first year, and they killed her and created a new queen, and it just sets the hive back, a few weeks, because there's no eggs being laid during that 16-day period where the queen's developing, and then another week or so after she's hatched to go mate. And so you're looking 3 or 4 weeks of no new eggs, no new bees. So it can set the hive back a little bit. You're going to need to feed a package to get them started. When a hive swarms and they take their old queen with them, they will gorge on honey before they leave, so they have a lot of food stored up to be able to start a new hive. When you buy a package, that's not the case. They are basically shaken off of frames from other hives, and so you need to feed them some sugar water to get them really building up the wax. And another con is a lot of times the packages come from the south. A lot of them will come from Georgia. And so a lot of people have issues with the southern bees. They're not used to the cold New England winters. They haven't been acclimated to the winters here. So they haven't been tested to make sure that they can survive, store up enough stores to make it through the winters of New England. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw it in the group chat as we're going through this stuff. So the other option is a nucleus colony. The more likely way you'll get it will be in the little cardboard, the corrugated plastic box on the left side. And then I made one out of wood for a swarm that I had caught. The pros of those: the bees have a head start. So they come with 5 fully drawn out frames already. The queen is already laying in. So this is basically a miniature hive that you're purchasing, a 5-frame hive. So the queen's already laying. There's going to be brood in there. There's going to be hatching. There's going to be eggs on a few of the frames already. You're going to have frames of pollen and brood and honey already in the hive. So all you'll have to do is just give them more room to expand. The downside is you can't get them as early as you can, the packages. Most of the time, the nucleus colonies don't become available until early June maybe. So they don't, while they have the head start with all the drawn comb, you get them a little bit later. They're more expensive. They're closer to $175 to $200 for a nucleus colony. And the frames may be old wax. So, a lot of times the beekeepers that are selling nukes aren't going to give their nice fresh frames to, they're not going to sell those. They're going to keep those for themselves. One of the other pros I forgot to put on here is a lot of times you can get a nucleus colony that has been overwintered in New England or from a hive that has been. So queen breeders will take, a hive that has good traits of being able to make it through a winter of New England and make queens from the eggs that she lays so that you have good genetics in the hives. Any questions? We kind of went through it relatively quickly, but I kind of wanted to make sure that I left time for questions on this one. because there's a lot of information um, in the different types of bees and how we go about installing them. I'll wait a minute or two, see if there's any questions here that come in. This picture here is one of the better pictures to tell the difference between a queen, a worker, and a drone. The really long thorax on the queen is a good indicator. Okay, so we have a question. So how do we transfer the bees into the hives? So when we go through, once you have the package or a nucleus. So a nucleus is easy because you're going to have, this box is going to have 5 frames in it. You're simply going to take each frame out, and the full hive that you'll have is probably going to be a 10 frame hive. Generally, they're 10 frame, and you'll just take the frames out and put them in the middle of the 10 frame hive, and then just put the empty frames on the side of it. And the important part is keeping them in the same orientation, because when the bees create their brood, they kind of keep them all together. It's kind of like a ball, and then they put pollen around that so that the nurse bees have a place to go and get their food. So you want to keep the orientation the same. So the nucleus is the easiest to install. Just do it that way. The package, there's a couple different ways, but the most common way is if you look on the top of the package, there's a little piece of Luan that's keeping the hole closed. You pop that off. You take out the can of sugar. Usually you'll spray them down with a little bit of sugar water, so they're more they'll clump together a little better, and they'll be more concerned with cleaning the sugar water off of each other than they will be with flying and stinging. And you shake them into the hive. So that's the more fun way, I think, to do it, is shaking them out. And if you can YouTube installing a package of bees, you can see a lot of people doing it that way. It's the easiest way to do it. And then the queen who's in the cage, there'll be a cork on one end, and you'll take the cork off, and there'll be a little sugar brick. And so when you put the queen in the hive, the bees will kind of eat away at the sugar over the course of 3 or 4 days. So it's kind of like a slow release. And so by the time they make their way into her, they're familiar with her pheromones, and generally will accept her as their queen. And then after 3 or 4 days, once she's out, you would take out the cage and be good to go. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about doing the hive inspections and that kind of thing, and what to expect your first week as a beekeeper. So another question, what do you recommend, a nuke versus a package for a first timer? I go either way. I've done both. The nucleus hive is nice from having the established colony to get started. I go both ways. I've used both. For a beginner, I think the package of bees is an easy way to get started. You have all of your frames. With the hive, when you purchase a hive, you get all the frames with it. You just take a couple out, shake the bees in, and save the big $50 and use that to buy a bunch of sugar at BJ's. No, but I mean, there's pros and cons to each. Like I kind of went over, but the nucleus hives are nice, but they're usually in pretty short supply. I know for myself, I usually get a few packages each year just to help friends and family who want to get into beekeeping. And so I've gotten packages for them and helped them install those. And I've made a few nukes of my own, sold a few here and there, but mostly I use them to expand my own apiary. So yeah, either way it'll work. The nukes are good for if you have a good local supplier that is breeding queens for good genetics and knowing that they'll make it through the winter. That's a nice thing. All right, and the next question: are 2 hives better than 1 to start with? Absolutely, they are. One of the main reasons is from a queen production. So if you have, let's say you have a queen, a hive that for whatever reason the queen died, or a queen never came back from her mating flight, got caught in bad weather, bird, what have you, walked into the wrong hive and got killed that way. If the bees don't have any eggs, they can't make themselves a new queen, and that hive is just going to die out. If you have 2 hives, you're able to take a frame of bees, as long as the queen isn't on that frame. You can take a frame of eggs from one hive, give it to the queenless hive, and they'll use those eggs to create a new queen. And I mean, that's a huge advantage. Another advantage to having 2 hives, I think, is being able to compare progress, between the 2 hives. So if one hive seems like it's doing really, really well, and the other one, not doing as well in, drying out comb on the frames, or the queen isn't laying as many eggs, it's nice to be able to compare. As a first-time beekeeper, you don't really know that your hive isn't doing well unless you have another one to compare it to. And oftentimes, one hive, if you do start with 2 hives, they'll be one will certainly do better than the other. And sometimes it's just the pheromone of one queen is more similar to the pheromone of the original queen for some of the bees, and so the foragers will go out and then they'll come back to the wrong hive, and so you'll end up with one hive that has more bees than the other. So it could happen either way, but yeah, absolutely. I think starting with 2 hives is a better way to go, just from being able to compare, being able to boost one hive, that might not be doing so well. And if at the end of the year, if you have a really, really weak hive and you're concerned that it's not going to be able to make it through the winter, there's ways to combine the 2 hives. You would end up having to kill one of the queens, but you can take all of the worker bees and the frames of honey that they stored up and combine them with the other hive. So instead of having a hive that is almost certainly not going to make it through the winter, you can have a really robust hive that is more likely to make it through. And then a lot of times the following spring, they're going to have the swarm impulse, because there's going to be a lot of bees in there. They're really going to be building up, and then you'll be able to split it back into 2 hives. Once you see queen cells, that they're building a new queen. You can take the existing queen and move her to a new hive with some new frames and with some bees and kind of create an artificial swarm. So you take the queen and make her think that she's swarmed. Good questions. All right, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to throw them in the group chat here. All right, looks like there's no more questions. So next week we'll go over all the hive components, the equipment, what you'll need, what you might want, and kind of delve into that a little bit more. But yeah, so with that, we'll end the meeting, and thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week. If I can figure out how to end the meeting.